everyone. Today we are going to discuss the interrelationship between language and literature. And I here begin with a question. Is it language through literature or literature through language? The question always persists in the minds of the learners in English language and English literature classrooms, where most of the students opt to study literature with an idea or aim to improve their language competence and performance at various levels. The answer is yes to both the situations, because it is possible both ways. We can learn language through literature and vice versa also. Language already exists in some measure when the student comes to the literature classroom or when the student comes to the language classroom. Language functions to express notions or ideas in situations, or to say it more precisely, language is always used with a purpose to communicate one's ideas, thoughts, opinions or views in a particular context. Literature provides a multi-dimensional contextual framework, not only to learn but to improve linguistic expressions. Linguistic expression always offers both vertical and horizontal choices to the literary writer, who enjoys the freedom to deviate from the norm to foreground the desired meaning in a literary text. Because both language and literature have roots in culture, the literary writer explores and attempts to use every linguistic possibility so as to semantically structure effective communication in a literary text or context. For instance, the word reap, which I have here illustrated on the board, you can have a look at it. Reap occurs in multiple contexts at different levels, and the following examples, if analyzed in a literature classroom, serve the purpose to expose the learners or the students how to stylistically analyze literary expressions to find out the meaning in a given linguistic situation or a literary context. The Solitary Reaper is a poem by William Wordsworth which describes the solitary highland lass or solitary highland girl engrossed in reaping and singing. The Scottish girl is reaping the harvest all alone in the field. Reaping is here directly used as here it is said to reap the corn, to reap the grain, reap the field of wheat or rice, or reap the field, which is a slightly deviant expression. And to reap in ordinary language denotes the activity of a farmer to cut and gather a crop in a field. And therefore, the following linguistic collocations are possible. Reap the corn, reap the grain, reap the harvest, or reap the field of wheat, rice or barley, etc. Or reap the field only. Reap the field, which is slightly deviant, as I told you. In all these usages, the surface level meaning and the deep structure meaning of the word reap is very much obvious and definitive, because there is hardly any deviation in 1, 2 and 3. These are normal expressions or normal collocations or normal linguistic choices, as it is written here right at the top of the board. And that is why the meaning of the word reap, as I told you, is very much obvious and definitive, because there is hardly any deviation from the norm. Though there is a slight deviation in the expression to reap the field. Why there is a slight deviation here? Because reaping is not performed with the fields as the target. The target object is the grain, the corn, the harvest. That is what is grown on the field. The sickle targets the wheat, the rice, the barley, or whatever is ready to be harvested from the field and collected. from the field by the farmer. Here the linguistic choice is not too challenging to be explained or inferred, and the learner or the reader at once understands the intended meaning in the given or the referred situation. But if we look at Joseph Addison's essay Westminster Abbey, Meditations in Westminster Abbey, there is a deliberate distancing between the sign and the referred. In the line which I am here quoting from this essay, the line goes like this, quote, "It acquaints us not only with the manner of his death, in which it was impossible for him to reap any honor." Look here, reap any honor. Here, reap and honor are distanced to the extent, that it deviates from the restrictions of choices, the linguistic choices which are imposed on the writer by norms of ordinary language. Similarly, Richard Steele's essay Recollections of Childhood uses a phrase, "can reap no advantage," here, which again leaves scope for assuming the significance or communicative value of any linguistic deviation. If we compare the reaping of harvest by the Highland Girl with the reaping of harvest by the Highland Girl with the reaping of honor by the dead English admiral, reap in the contextual framework of Addison's essay connotes an action which yields results, rewards, benefits, or advantages for one's performance in battlefield. Reaping advantage also conveys the reward or benefits of the years of hard work of one's labor. The reaper is the performer in all the three situations, whether reaping the corn or field, reaping the honor or reaping the advantage. The reaper is performer, whereas the farmer's performance as a reaper on the field is directly conveyed in the later expressions. The reader or the learner is struck by the difficulty of deciding between choice within the framework of normal linguistic paradigms and special or deviant paradigms, as the original meaning of the word reap is transferred to the distinguished semantic variant in a specific context that corresponds to logically connotative signifier in a literary discourse. Therefore, linguistic expressions in literary texts reap more than what is sown, though the proverb goes like this, "As you sow, so shall you reap." But in literature, we reap more than what we sow. Thus, language denotes as well as connotes, and it can be very well understood and illustrated through B.B. Shelley's poem Ode to the West Wind, where the concluding line, which is epigrammatic as well as aphoristic expression, and it is often quoted also, "If winter comes, can spring be far behind?" This line is not simply a literary expression as it appears at the surface level, but linguistically it is very, very significant. Why it is significant? Because the winter and the spring are not ordinarily referred to the regular pattern of cyclic order of weather conditions and changes taking place in nature in any geographical region. To comprehend the intentional connotation in Shelley's poem, first of all, we shall look at the denotative meaning of the winter and spring in general. The weather conditions, temperature, atmospheric distinctions in these seasons, etc., which are followed by the destructive and creative powers of these seasons respectively, in connection with the theme of death and rebirth in the cycle of life at large. The winter, in the concluding line of the poem, is to be linked with the dark wintry bed in the first stanza of the poem, which is a symbol of degeneration, decay, and darkness, associated with the preservation of seeds of life in the upcoming spring season, which will bloom into flowers. The spring in the expression also finds an echo in the living hues and odors of the blooming flowers in stanza 1, conveying the notion of spring or regeneration or revival of life that occurs in the spring season. Through the poem, Shelley intends to arouse the world from its wintry stupor and despair or dejection or disappointments of life, and move on to rejuvenation and renewal in life. As the season changes in the cycle of nature, in the same manner, the cyclic order of life in the human world also stands in need of change, and it is also subject to change also, where anguish is followed by hope for brighter future. The poet, drawing freely from all the expressive resources of language, shows the readers how linguistic choices precisely fulfill the purpose of a literary writer who enjoys the freedom to forge or to create meaning, exercising degrees of deviations, first exercising choices in order to create degrees of deviations and connect the widespread notions about winter and spring in the poem with the bleakness and depth of the year, and assembles the whole lot of linguistic transgressions on a note of hope to look beyond the degenerative impasse to the reawakening of energetic powers which shall be the spring beyond the winter. As we have chosen to learn language, there is no doubt that literature and language go together. And it is very true that if literature comes, language cannot be far behind, and vice versa also. You can have a look at such transgressive or deviant illustrations in other poems which you are reading, and find out how the poets have violated the normal choices to deviate and through deviation foreground the intended meaning in a literary text. Thank you very much.